Veilthrun interrupted. They have weapons and ships, so does every species we have crushed. The fact that they hid them simply means they are cowards as well as fools. Formation commanders, bring the full armada to bear. We end this now. 12,000 warships began to move into attack formation, their engines blazing like angry stars against the black void, and the largest military force the Zarathi had deployed in over a century turned its full attention toward the small blue world below. In the bunker beneath the Alps, Amara Osei watched the fleet reposition on her tactical display, and she felt no surprise, because she had expected exactly this. She had studied the Zarathi for years, studied their psychology and their history and their patterns of behavior, and she knew that an Archon like Veilthrun would never retreat from what he would see as a challenge to his pride. She had counted on it. They are moving into attack formation, General Chen reported. We estimate full engagement readiness in approximately 90 minutes. Then we have 90 minutes, Amara said, and she turned to her communications officer. Open a channel. All Zarathi frequencies, unencrypted, maximum broadcast range. The communications officer looked up with wide eyes. Unencrypted. That means every ship in the fleet will hear it, and every relay station within 50 light-years, and every vassal world within range of those stations. That is exactly what I want, Amara said. Every ear in this part of the galaxy is going to hear what I have to say. The channel opened, and for a moment there was nothing but the soft hiss of static across 1,000 frequencies. Zarathi military channels, diplomatic channels, civilian channels, and the emergency bands that connected to every vassal species monitoring station within broadcast range. All of them suddenly carrying the voice of a single human woman standing in a bunker beneath a mountain on a world that the galaxy had never heard of. Amara spoke, and her voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made even the people in the room with her stand a little straighter. This message is for Archon Veilthrun, for the Zarathi Galactic Empire, and for every species listening across the stars. On the throne of silence, Veilthrun's mandibles stopped clicking. On vassal worlds across the frontier, communication officers leaned toward their screens. In the desert tower on Earth, Governor Cythara closed her golden eyes and listened. My name is Amara Osei, and I speak for the people of Earth. 3 days ago you came to our world without invitation and without warning. You told us to kneel. You told us that our planet, our home, the world where our children were born and where our ancestors are buried, now belongs to you, and you expected us to simply accept this. She paused, and the silence across every frequency was absolute. We did not accept it. We have never accepted it. What you mistook for submission was patience, and what you mistook for weakness was a choice. We wanted to give you a chance to leave peacefully. That chance is now being offered for the last time. On the bridge of every Zarathi warship, officers exchanged uneasy glances. No species had ever spoken to the Empire like this. Not once in 12,000 years. Here are our terms, Amara continued, and her voice hardened into something that sounded less like a diplomat and more like a hammer falling on an anvil. You will withdraw every ship, every soldier, and every drone from our solar system within 6 hours. You will broadcast to your entire empire that the planet Earth is sovereign territory, and that any future incursion will be met with total and overwhelming force. And you will release every vassal species within 200 light-years of our borders from their obligations to your empire, effective immediately. Veilthrun's officers stared at their consoles in disbelief. The human was not just demanding the Empire leave Earth, she was demanding they free hundreds of worlds. It was insanity. It was arrogance beyond anything they had ever encountered. But Amara was not finished. If you refuse these terms, hear me clearly. We will not simply defeat your fleet. We will dismantle your empire, world by world, system by system, until the very name, Zarathi, is nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered by frightened children in the dark corners of the galaxy. You came here believing you were predators, and we were prey. You were wrong. You have 6 hours. This is not a request, and it is not a negotiation. It is the only warning you will ever receive." The transmission ended, and silence fell across the stars like a held breath. On a dozen vassal worlds, the recording was already being copied and shared and whispered about in hidden rooms where oppressed species gathered in secret. A species no one had ever heard of had just told the Zarathi Empire to release its grip on the galaxy, and the impossible audacity of it lit something in the hearts of creatures who had not felt hope in generations. On the throne of silence, Vael'Thrun sat in that silence for 10 long seconds, and then he began to laugh. A harsh clicking sound that echoed through the bridge. "Brave," he said, almost admiringly. "Stupid, but brave. All ships, attack formation confirmed. Weapons free on my command. Burn that world to glass." The armada surged forward, 12,000 warships accelerating toward Earth, with every weapon charging and every shield at full power. And from the outside, it must have looked like the end of humanity, an unstoppable wave of destruction bearing down on a single fragile world. In the bunker, Amara watched them come, and she felt no fear, because fear was something she had used up long ago in places far less important than this. She turned to General Chen, and to the admirals and commanders who stood ready at their stations, the men and women who had trained for this moment for decades, who had built the weapons and the ships and the plans that were about to be unleashed upon the galaxy. "PP, they chose poorly," she said quietly. Then she gave the order that changed everything. "Light them up." 5 years after the Battle of Earth, the galaxy was a different place, and the change had come so fast that historians would spend generations arguing about whether it was humanity that broke the old order, or whether the old order had been ready to break all along, and humanity had simply been the hand that pushed the first stone. The Zarathi Empire, which had ruled the Orion Arm for 12,000 years with an iron grip that no species had ever challenged, was fractured beyond repair. The rebellion that Amara OC had ignited with her broadcast did not burn slowly. It burned like a wildfire, fed by centuries of stored rage. Within weeks of the Battle of Earth, uprisings had erupted on dozens of vassal worlds, as species that had lived under the boot of the Empire for generations saw the footage of 12,000 Zarathi warships being torn apart by a single planet, and realized that the thing they had believed was impossible was not impossible at all. Months, over 300 vassal species had declared independence. Within 2 years, that number had risen to 800. The Empire tried to crush the rebellions, but it was fighting on too many fronts with too few resources. The fleet that Vael'Thrun had lost at Earth represented a significant portion of the Empire's military power, and replacing those ships took time that the rebels did not give them. Every time the Zarathi concentrated their forces to put down one uprising, 3 more would ignite somewhere else, and the strategic coordination between the rebel movements bore the unmistakable signature of human advisors and human technology working behind the scenes. Because humanity had not sat idle after the battle, Amara Ose understood something fundamental about power that the Zarathi had never learned. True strength was not about how many worlds you could conquer, but about how many allies you could earn. And in the months after the battle, she sent envoys to every vassal species that would receive them, not with demands or conditions, but with a simple offer. "We will help you free yourselves. We ask nothing in return except your friendship." It was an offer that the galaxy had never heard before, and many species were suspicious of it, because the only framework they had for understanding power was the Zarathi model of domination and extraction. Surely the humans wanted something. Surely there was a price. Surely this was just another form of empire wearing a kinder mask. But the humans proved them wrong again and again. Human engineers helped rebuild shattered infrastructure on liberated worlds. Human doctors brought medical knowledge that saved millions of lives. Human diplomats sat patiently in rooms, full of species that had every reason to distrust outsiders. And they listened more than they spoke, and they never once tried to tell anyone what to do. And when the Zarathi sent punitive fleets to crush the rebellions, human warships appeared alongside the rebel forces, fighting and bleeding and dying for worlds that were not their own, for species they had only just met, for the simple principle that no one should have to kneel. The galaxy did not know what to make of this. In 12,000 years of Zarathi rule, no species had ever fought for another species without expecting payment. And the fact that humans did it willingly, and even seemed to consider it an honor, confused and amazed every civilization that witnessed it. Amara's vision took formal shape in the 3rd year after the battle, with the creation of the Free Worlds Compact. It was not an empire, and it was not a federation in the traditional sense. It was a mutual defense and cooperation agreement between liberated species that guaranteed 3 things: absolute sovereignty for every member world, shared defense against any external threat, and a commitment to mutual aid in times of crisis. Would rule over another. No species would extract tribute from another, and any member could leave at any time, for any reason. Humanity was the compact's strongest member, but Amara insisted that humans would hold no special authority within it. The governing council gave equal voice to every species, regardless of size or power. And when some of her own advisors argued that Earth had earned the right to lead, Amara shut them down with words that became the compact's unofficial motto. We did not fight to replace one empire with another. We fought so that no empire would ever be necessary again. The remaining Zarathi loyalist systems watched all of this with growing dread. The core worlds of the empire, the ancient homeworlds and fortress systems that had been the seat of Zarathi power since before most member species had developed writing, still held together, but they were a shadow of what they had been. Their borders had shrunk by more than half. Military was stretched thin defending what remained, and their economy was collapsing as the tribute that had sustained them for millennia stopped flowing from worlds that no longer answered to them. The Emperor, a towering figure known only by his title, who had ruled from the crystal throne for over a century, sealed the borders and declared that the empire would endure as it always had, eternal and unbreakable. But inside those sealed borders, something was changing. Archon Veilthrun had returned to the imperial capital in disgrace after the Battle of Earth. His titles were stripped, his honors were revoked, and he was paraded through the streets of the capital as an example of failure. The first Archon to lose a fleet to a species that most Zarathi had never heard of. He accepted his punishment in silence, but he was not the same creature who had flown to Earth 5 years ago. Something had changed in him during those terrible hours when his fleet burned. Around him, something that went deeper than pride or shame. He had seen something at Earth that he could not forget. He had seen a species that fought not to conquer, but to protect, that showed mercy to its enemies when it had every right to show none, that broadcast its battle not as propaganda, but as a signal of hope to every oppressed world in range. And in the years since his return, he had watched that species do exactly what its leader had promised, not building an empire, but dismantling one and replacing it with something better. Veilthrun requested an audience with the Imperial Senate, a body of elder Zarathi who advised the Emperor, and after months of being refused, he was finally granted 10 minutes to speak. He used every second of them. He stood before the assembled senators, stripped of his armor and his rank, wearing the plain gray robes of a disgraced officer, and he told them the truth that none of them wanted to hear. "Our age is over," said, and his voice was calm and clear. "Not because the humans destroyed our fleet. Fleets can be rebuilt. Our age is over because the humans showed the galaxy something that we spent 12,000 years trying to hide. That we are not gods, that we are not invincible, that we rule not because we deserve to, but because no one had the courage to challenge us. One species on one small world found that courage, and now the galaxy will never fear us again. We can seal our borders and pretend that the universe has not changed, but it has changed, and we must change with it, or we will be forgotten. The Senate did not change with it. Vaelthrun was arrested before he left the chamber and charged with treason and sedition and defeatism, and a dozen other crimes that all meant the same thing. He had spoken truth to power, and power did not want to hear it. He was executed 3 days later in the traditional Zarathi manner, alone and in silence, and the Senate expected that. To be the end of it, they were wrong. Vaelthrun's speech had been recorded by a young Senate aide, who smuggled it out of the capital, and within days it was being shared across the remaining Zarathi worlds. And it resonated not with the military or the elite, but with ordinary Zarathi citizens, who had watched their empire shrink and their economy crumble, and who were tired of being told that everything was fine, when it clearly was not. A reform movement began, small at first, then growing. Zarathi citizens who believed their civilization could survive if it adapted, if it let go of the old ways of conquest and tribute, and learned to exist alongside other species as equals. They called themselves the Thrun Kai, which roughly translated to those who see clearly. And they wore small gray badges, in honor of the disgraced Archon who had been executed for telling the truth. The galaxy was transforming, and not everyone was happy about it. Watched humanity's rise with complicated emotions. The Larathi theocracy, a vast religious civilization that controlled a neighboring arm of the galaxy, sent diplomatic delegations that spoke of spiritual kinship and mutual understanding, but whose eyes were calculating. The Kale Collective, a hive-mind species that communicated through shared consciousness, expressed fascination with humanity's chaotic individualism and requested cultural exchanges. The Silent Ones of the Abyss, ancient beings who lived in the spaces between stars and who had not spoken to another species in 10,000 years, sent a single message to Earth that contained only 3 words, in a language that took human linguists 6 months to translate. We are watching. Some of these powers came with genuine offers of friendship. Others came to test humanity's resolve and look for weaknesses. All of them left with the same understanding, an understanding that would become the foundational truth of the new galactic order. Humans were not to be conquered, not to be underestimated, and not to be feared. But they could be trusted, and in a galaxy that had known nothing but empires and subjugation for millennia, trust was the most revolutionary weapon of all. In the 5th year after the battle, Amara Osei stepped down as Secretary General of the United Earth Defense Council. She was 77 years old, and she was tired. Not the tiredness of defeat, but the satisfied tiredness of someone who had done what they set out to do and could now rest. She had been offered a 3rd term, and she had refused it because she believed that no single person should hold power for too long, not even her, especially not her. Her final address was broadcast across the compact and beyond, to every world that had a receiver capable of picking up the signal, and billions of beings of hundreds of species stopped what they were doing to listen. We did not fight because we wanted war, she said, and her voice was older now, but no less steady than it had been 5 years ago in a bunker beneath the Alps. We fought because no one should ever have to kneel. The stars do not belong to empires. They belong to everyone brave enough to reach for them. What we have built together, this compact, this alliance of free worlds, is not perfect, and it never will be, but it is honest, and it is just, and it is ours, all of ours. Protect it, nurture it, and never let anyone tell you that freedom is too expensive, or too difficult, or too dangerous. It is the only thing worth fighting for. She stepped away from the podium, and the galaxy applauded. Far away on a small world that had been liberated from the Zarathi 3 years earlier, a world of purple skies and silver forests, where a species of gentle amphibians was slowly rebuilding after generations of oppression. a young Zarathi child, sat on the steps of a refugee shelter and looked up at the night sky. She was the daughter of a Zarathi garrison officer who had chosen to stay behind when the Empire retreated, one of thousands of Zarathi who had found themselves stranded on liberated worlds, and who had been, to their eternal surprise, welcomed rather than punished. Her mother sat beside her, and together they watched the stars come out one by one, and the child pointed at a faint yellow dot low on the horizon, and asked what it was. "That is their sun," her mother said softly, "the son of the humans, the species from the small blue world." The child was quiet for a moment, thinking in the way that children think, without the weight of history or politics or old hatred. "Are they gods?" she asked. Her mother looked at that distant light, and thought about the empire she had served, and the world she now lived in, and the impossible, terrifying, wonderful species that had torn down everything she had known, and replaced it with something she was only beginning to understand. "No," she said, and she pulled her daughter close. "They are human, and that is enough." Above them, the stars burned on in their ancient silence, and somewhere out there, on 1,000 worlds and 1,000 more beyond those, the story of the small blue planet was being told and retold, and passed from parent to child, and from elder to youth, growing with each telling into something larger than history, a legend, a promise, a proof that even the smallest light can break the deepest darkness. The galaxy remembered. The galaxy would always remember. The first 11 seconds of the battle would be studied by military scholars across the galaxy for centuries to come, and they would never fully agree on how it was possible. Aegis activated at the exact moment Amara gave the order, and the AI did not hesitate, did not pause, did not waste a single millisecond on doubt. It simply did what it had been built to do, with a cold and perfect efficiency that no living mind could match. Every hidden weapons platform on 6 continents fired simultaneously. Particle beams erupted from beneath mountains. Railguns buried under deserts hurled tungsten slugs at orbital velocities. Directed energy arrays hidden in the deep ocean punched beams of concentrated fury straight up through miles of water and atmosphere and into the void beyond. And from beneath the ice of Antarctica, the planetary shield generator roared to life, wrapping the Earth in a shimmering barrier of energy that turned the planet into an unbreakable fortress. Zarathi fleet had been advancing in standard attack formation, a formation they had used for millennia against species that could barely fight back. And it was exactly the wrong formation for what hit them. 4,000 warships were destroyed or disabled in those first 11 seconds. The numbers were staggering, and the destruction was absolute. Ships that had conquered worlds were torn apart like paper in a storm. Vessels crewed by veterans of 100 campaigns simply ceased to exist, as weapons they had never encountered and could not understand ripped through their shields, as if those shields were not even there. The Zarathi had always believed their technology was superior to any young species, and in 11 seconds, that belief died along with the crews of 4,000 ships. The survivors were thrown into chaos. Their communications were jammed by Aegis, which had cracked every Zarathi encryption protocol, and was now flooding their channels with noise. Their sensors were blinded by electronic warfare systems that painted false targets across their displays. Their formation was shattered, and their chain of command was broken, and for the first time in living memory, a Zarathi fleet did not know what to do. And then the hidden fleet launched, from the ocean trenches of the Pacific and the Atlantic, from hollowed-out mountains in the Rockies and the Himalayas and the Andes, from underground hangars in Siberia and the Australian outback. 2,000 human warships rose into the sky like vengeful spirits climbing out of the underworld. Sleek and angular and bristling with weapons that gleamed in the light of a sun the Zarathi would learn to fear. These ships were not crude copies of alien technology. They were something new, something that human engineers had built by studying Zarathi designs and then asking the question that humans always asked. The question that had driven their species from caves to the stars. Can we make this better? The answer was terrifying. Human ships were faster because human engineers had found inefficiencies in Zarathi drive systems and eliminated them. Human shields were stronger because human physicists had discovered a resonance frequency that doubled the energy absorption capacity. Human weapons hit harder because human weapons designers were frankly disturbingly creative when it came to finding new ways to destroy things. And the pilots. The human pilots were something else entirely. The Zarathi had always considered themselves among the toughest species in the galaxy, but their bodies had limits that human bodies did not share. Human pilots pulled maneuvers at gravitational forces that would have killed a Zarathi crew instantly. They flew with a reckless precision that should not have been possible, threading their ships through gaps in the enemy formation that were barely wider than their hulls, and they fought with something that the Zarathi had no word for because they had never encountered it before. It was joy. Not cruelty and not madness, but the fierce, burning joy of a species that had spent its entire existence fighting against things bigger and stronger than itself and winning anyway. The joy of the underdog that refuses to stay down. And it burned in every human pilot like rocket fuel as they tore into the shattered remnants of the Zarathi fleet. On the ground, the story was the same. The 200,000 Zarathi occupation troops had been spread across the planet in garrison positions designed to control a compliant population, not to fight a war. And when the hidden human military forces emerged from their concealment, the result was not a battle, but a reckoning. Human soldiers were augmented with powered exoskeletons and neural-linked targeting systems, and they were connected to Aegis, which fed them real-time tactical data on every enemy position. But more than that, were fighting on their own soil, in their own cities, for their own families. And there is no force in the galaxy more dangerous than a human being defending their home. The Zarathi troops were well-trained and disciplined, but they were completely unprepared for what they faced. Humans did not fight like any species in the Empire's experience. They adapted in real time, changing tactics on the fly when something did not work. They improvised weapons out of anything available when their ammunition ran low. They communicated in ways that Aegis could not even track, using hand signals and facial expressions and 1,000 years of shared cultural instinct that no alien could read or predict. A Zarathi battalion commander in Mumbai sent a desperate report to orbit before his position was overrun, and his words became one of the most quoted passages in galactic military history. They do not stop. We kill 10 and 20 more appear. They are not just soldiers. Single one of them is a soldier. The civilians are soldiers. The elderly are soldiers. The children throw rocks with accuracy that damages our sensor equipment. This species does not have a military. This species is a military. Request immediate evacuation. This world cannot be held. There was no evacuation coming because the fleet above had problems of its own. Archon Veilthrun stood on the bridge of the Throne of Silence and watched his empire's pride burn. Half his fleet was gone, and the other half was being systematically taken apart by ships that should not have existed, from a world that should have been helpless. His tactical displays were useless, his communications were jammed, and for the first time in his long career, he felt something that he did not recognize because he had never felt it before. It was fear. How, he whispered, and his mandibles barely moved. How is this possible? No one on his bridge had an answer. Desert. Governor Scythara watched the battle from her tower and made a decision that saved her life and the lives of her staff. She opened a channel to the human forces and surrendered unconditionally. When human soldiers entered the tower, they found her standing calmly in the center of her command room, with her hands visible and empty. and she said simply, "I yield this world. It was never mine to take." Amara Ose gave strict orders about how prisoners were to be treated, with dignity and respect, and absolutely no cruelty, because this was important to her, perhaps more important than the battle itself. "We are not them," she told her commanders. "We fight because we must, but we do not become monsters in the process. Every prisoner is to be fed and sheltered, and their wounded are to receive medical care. The galaxy is watching, and they will see not just how we fight, but how we win." And the galaxy was indeed watching. Aegis had been broadcasting the entire battle on every frequency it could reach, every angle, every engagement, every moment of the fight, and the signal was being received on hundreds of worlds across the Zerathi frontier, vassal planets where oppressed species watched with wide eyes as a single world tore apart the fleet that had enslaved them. The message was not subtle, and it did not need to be. "The Empire can bleed," the message said. "The Empire can be broken. The Empire is not invincible, and it never was. Rise." On the bridge of the crippled Throne of Silence, Veilthrun gave the order to retreat. The first retreat order given by a Zerathi Archon in over 300 years. And the shattered remnants of his fleet limped toward the edge of the solar system, trailing debris and fire and shame. Amara had given specific orders that the flagship was not to be destroyed. She wanted it intact. She wanted Veilthrun alive. She wanted him to carry the memory of this day back to the heart of the Empire, like a wound that would never heal. As the Throne of Silence crawled away from Earth, one final transmission reached the Archon's bridge. It was Amara's voice, calm and steady as it had been from the very beginning. "Tell your Emperor what you found here," she said. "Tell him about the world that would not kneel. Tell him about the species that was supposed to be helpless and was anything but, and tell him this." She paused, and when she spoke again, every ear in the fleet heard the words that would echo through history. "We are coming." The transmission ended, and the stars were quiet. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, a broken fleet carried a message home, a message that would change everything. And on a dozen vassal worlds, the fires of rebellion had already begun to burn. The Zerathi occupation ships descended through Earth's atmosphere like dark metal gods falling from the sky, and every human who looked up felt their stomach twist with a mixture of terror and fury. There were hundreds of them, troop carriers the size of football stadiums, command vessels bristling with weapons, and swarms of smaller drones that spread out across the planet like flies over a carcass. And they landed everywhere, in deserts and plains and open fields, disgorging soldiers and equipment with the cold efficiency of a machine that had done this to 1,000 worlds before. The ground troops numbered roughly 200,000, tall armored figures of various alien species, all serving under the Zerathi banner. And they moved into the major cities with weapons drawn, but not raised, because they expected no trouble, and they had never received any on worlds like this. Governor Cythara arrived on the third day, smooth blue-green skin, and large golden eyes, and a voice like silk over steel. And she was considered one of the Empire's finest administrators, a diplomat who could make subjugation feel almost polite. And she established her seat of power in a massive spire that her engineers constructed in the Sahara Desert in less than 48 hours. A gleaming tower of alien metal that rose half a kilometer into the sky, like a knife stabbed into the body of the Earth. From that tower, she broadcast her first decree to the planet. The governments of this world are dissolved. All military forces will disband. All natural resources now belong to the Zerathi Galactic Empire. All citizens will register with their local compliance office within 10 days. Resistance is not merely futile, it is beneath you. Welcome to the Empire. On the surface it appeared that humanity had accepted its fate. People lined up at compliance offices with dull eyes and slumped shoulders. Governments issued statements of cooperation, and the streets were quiet. But beneath the surface, far beneath it, something very different was happening. In a bunker carved into the rock, 300 meters below the Swiss Alps, Secretary General Amara Osei stood before a wall of screens that showed her everything. Every Zarathi troop position, every drone patrol route, every communication frequency the aliens used. And she was smiling. "Report," she said. General James Chen, commander of Earth's hidden military forces, stepped forward with a tablet in his hand, and the look of a man who had been waiting his entire career for this moment. "Project Prometheus is at full readiness," he said. Project Prometheus was humanity's greatest secret and its greatest achievement. A black-budget initiative that had consumed trillions of dollars over 80 years, funded in secret by every major nation on Earth, and hidden so deeply that even most world leaders had not known about it. Not known its full scope until Amara revealed it 3 days ago. It was not just a weapons program. It was everything. Deep beneath the ocean floors, in caverns hollowed out by nuclear boring machines, sat a fleet of over 2,000 warships. Not the clumsy 300 ships that the Zarathi had seen in Earth's public records, but sleek and terrible vessels, designed by engineers who had spent decades studying intercepted Zarathi technology and then improving upon it. Ships with faster engines, stronger shields, and weapons that the Empire had never seen before. Across 6 continents, hidden in mountains and under cities and inside abandoned mines, sat thousands of directed energy weapons platforms capable of reaching orbit. Particle beams and railguns and things that did not yet have proper names because they were so new and so devastating that the scientists who built them sometimes lost sleep thinking about what they had created. All was Aegis. Aegis was an artificial intelligence warfare network that connected every single military asset on and off the planet into one unified system. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier, every satellite, every sensor, all of them linked together and coordinated by a machine mind that could process 1 billion tactical decisions per second and execute them with perfect precision. Humanity had not built a defense. Humanity had built a death trap, and then invited the enemy to walk into it. "The Zarathi are blind," Chen continued. "Their jammers are strong, but Aegis is operating on quantum-encrypted channels they cannot detect. We have full awareness of their forces, and they have zero awareness of ours." Amara nodded, and then activated a secure channel that reached every hidden military installation on the planet, and every loyal commander who had been waiting in the dark for 3 long days. "This is Osei," she said, and her voice was steady as stone. "They came to our home, expecting sheep. They landed on our soil and told us we belong to them. They looked at our children and saw property. In 48 hours, we will show them what we really are. Every soldier, every pilot, every engineer, every person on this planet is a weapon they did not account for. Be ready." The channel closed, and the waiting continued, but now it was a different kind of waiting. Not the helpless waiting of prey, but the patient waiting of a predator watching its target move closer and closer to the kill zone. Meanwhile, on the surface, the Zarathi were beginning to notice things that did not make sense. Their drones kept malfunctioning in certain cities. Nothing dramatic, just minor glitches that the technicians could not explain. Patrol routes that should have been clear were blocked by accidents and construction that always seemed to happen at the worst possible time. Supply lines between landing zones experienced delays, caused by what appeared to be natural weather events, but always struck at the most inconvenient moments. And the humans themselves were strange. They were cooperative, yes. They showed up to the compliance offices, and they answered questions, and they followed instructions. But there was something behind their eyes that the Zarathi soldiers could not identify. A look that was not fear and not submission, but something else entirely. One junior Zarathi officer, a young insectoid named Keth, wrote in his personal log that evening something that would later become famous across the galaxy. The humans disturb me. They smile too much, and they ask too many questions about our technology. They want to know how everything works, how it is built, how it is maintained. They say it is curiosity, but it does not feel like curiosity. It feels like reconnaissance. I reported my concerns to my commander, and he laughed at me. But I cannot shake the feeling that something is very wrong on this world. Keth was right, and the proof came sooner than anyone expected. 3 Zarathi scout ships had been sent to survey Earth's moon 2 days ago, routine mapping missions with small crews, and all 3 had gone silent, their signals simply vanishing as if they had never existed. Governor Scythara received this report in her tower, and felt the first cold touch of unease. Losing 1 ship to a malfunction was normal. Losing 3 was not, and she made a decision that would change everything. She ordered a deep scan of the planet, not the casual surface sweep that the initial fleet had performed, but a full, penetrating scan that would reveal everything hidden beneath the surface of the Earth. The scan took 4 hours, and when the results appeared on her screen, Scythara felt her blood go cold in a way it had never gone cold before in her long and distinguished career. The images showed weapons, thousands of them, buried under mountains and oceans and ice, and ships, so many ships, waiting in the dark like sleeping predators, and a network of energy signatures so vast and so powerful that it dwarfed anything the occupation fleet carried. She reached for her communicator with shaking hands and sent an emergency transmission to Archon Vilthrune on the flagship above. "My lord," she said, and her voice cracked for the first time in her life. "This is not a subjugation target. This world is not what we thought it was. We have made a terrible mistake." She paused, and then spoke the words that would echo through Zarathi military history for centuries. "This is a trap." The year was 2097, and the people of Earth had no idea that their entire world was about to change forever. It started on a Tuesday morning, when every screen on the planet went dark at the same time. Every phone, every television, every computer, every billboard in every city across every continent, all of them flickered and then displayed the same image. It was a face, but not a human face. The creature was tall and insectoid, with gleaming black eyes that reflected no light, and mandibles that clicked together as it spoke in a voice that somehow translated itself into every language on Earth at the same time. "I am Archon Vilthrune of the Zarathi Galactic Empire," the creature said, "and your world now belongs to us." The message was simple and brutal, and left no room for misunderstanding. Humanity had 1 planetary rotation, roughly 24 hours, to surrender completely and accept their new role as a tributary species of the Empire, or the Armada, of 12,000 warships currently sitting beyond the orbit of Jupiter, would reduce Earth to a burned and broken rock. Panic spread like fire through dry grass. In New York, people flooded the streets, screaming and crying and looking up at the sky as if they could see the alien ships from the ground. In Tokyo, the trains stopped running for the first time in decades. In Lagos and London and Sao Paulo and Cairo, the story was the same. Pure, raw terror gripping the hearts of 8 billion people who had just learned they were not alone in the universe and that the universe was not friendly. Within the hour, every world leader was scrambling to respond, and emergency sessions were called in every capital, and the newly built United Earth Defense Council headquarters in Geneva became the center of the storm. Generals and admirals and defense ministers filled the war room with grim faces and even grimmer numbers. Earth had a fledgling space fleet of roughly 300 ships, built over the past few decades as humanity had slowly pushed out into the solar system. 300 ships against 12,000 was not a battle. It was a joke, and every military mind in the room knew it. "We cannot fight them," said the Russian defense minister, his voice flat and defeated. We cannot run either, said the American chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Then, we surrender, said the French president, and the room erupted into shouting. But one person in that room did not shout, and did not argue, and did not panic. Secretary General Amara Osei sat at the head of the long table, with her hands folded calmly in front of her, and she waited for the noise to die down. She was a woman of 62 years with silver hair cut short, and deep brown skin, and eyes that had seen things that would break most people. She had been a combat engineer in 3 different conflicts before turning to politics, and she had built bridges under gunfire, defused bombs with steady hands, and she had never once in her life made a decision out of fear. When the room finally quieted, she spoke. Have they scanned us yet? The question hung in the air like smoke, and for a moment no one understood what she was asking. What do you mean? Asked the British Prime Minister. I mean, have they actually looked at what we have? Have they sent probes into our atmosphere? Have they scanned our military installations? Have they measured our technology? Or did they just show up and assume we would fold? The room went silent as the intelligence analysts scrambled through their data, and the answer came back within minutes. The Zarathi had not conducted any deep scans of Earth. They had sent what appeared to be a standard subjugation fleet, the kind they used on pre-spacefaring civilizations, and their entire approach suggested they believed humanity was primitive and helpless, and not worth the effort of a proper scan. Assessment. Amara smiled, and it was not a warm smile. They do not know what we are, she said quietly. She stood up and looked around the room at the most powerful people on the planet, and she told them something that most of them did not know, something that had been classified at the highest levels of secrecy for over 50 years. 80 years ago, long before the Zarathi arrived, Earth's deep space listening stations had intercepted alien signals, encrypted transmissions that took decades to decode, and when they were finally decoded, they revealed the existence of the Zarathi Empire and its method of expansion. Find a world, demand surrender, crush any resistance, and move on to the next. Earth's governments had known this day was coming for a very long time, and they had prepared. But Amara did not reveal what that preparation looked like, not yet, because the most important thing right now was not what humanity had built in secret, but what humanity showed on the surface. We go dark, Amara said, and her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Every military asset goes underground or powers down. Every orbital station shuts off its systems. Every